The world does go on around about the lockdowns in New South Wales and in Queensland. We'll have the Queensland figures for you shortly. The Defence Department federally has set out and don't you love the red tape around defence, a 4-year process, it calls it, to reform the Australian Defence Force culture and command accountability. It said that they are going to weed out wrongdoers and strip medals. I thought we'd been down this track already, from unworthy recipients. This is a response to the Brereton War Crimes Inquiry. Former Special Forces Commando Heston Russell joins me again. Nice to talk to you again, mate.
Good morning, Steve. Good to chat with you.
Is this what's needed?
Steve, this is really, really perplexing, but I think it's very important for listeners to just go back and understand what was only a few news cycles ago. So November last year, we had the Chief of Defence Force and Prime Minister stand up and grandstand essentially a brutal truce in the release of this Brereton report, basically 2 weeks after receiving the report, including the Chief of Defence Force saying they're going to strip the meritorious unit citation from over 3,400 Special Forces personnel, including the 21 veterans we'd lost during that conflict. Then there was a large public backlash, of which people like yourself and many others were really pivotal in helping to, in particular, lead to the new Defence Minister stating that those unit citations weren't going to be released. And since then, we've had everything from a Defence Minister changeover through to that backlash continue. And what we've got now is a really, really detailed project management report that is basically saying that Defence is going to spend the next 4 years to address these cultural issues, and they're broken down into 2 objectives: addressing the past and preventing the reoccurrence, based on what was contained within the Brereton report. And what is basically here is essentially what should have been done, considered and delivered before anyone stood up and grandstanded about removing group punishment, removing bulk citations, before even any of these allegations had seen any of their time in an investigation, let alone their time in court.
So they basically put the cart before the horse. They tried and convicted all of these great Australians, and now once they realise that the public opinion is against them, they now got this report and they're going to spend 4 years investigating it, whereas they should have done that before they made any of it public, right?
Yeah, we have a saying in when you're going through your officer training, you're required to do these sort of tactical assessments and activities. And what many people used to do is to jump to the conclusion and then basically build a plan that we call was situating the appreciation. So as you read through this very detailed, full of catchwords and well-grafted, bright orange 36-page report, you can basically link it all the way back to see how they have now sort of justifying all of the actions they have made. There is also a lot of backpedaling in this, Steve, as in particular, a lot of water under the bridge has realised how hard it's actually going to be to convict most of these peoples on these allegations. But it really, really, really is, for me, so disappointing to see this for a number of occasions, particularly it's a document talking about culture. First and foremost, you don't manage culture. Culture is inspired by leadership, and leadership is top down and the bottom up. And leadership is the best antidote that our country, let alone our Defence Force, could achieve at the moment to help bring people up, to unite them in a higher purpose. Secondly, and most importantly for those within this situation, is it in particular is talking about addressing the cultural issues identified by the Brereton report within the Special Forces Task Force and Special Operations Command. Even though we had the very unceremoniously removal of the last 6 people from Afghanistan on the 11th of July, the last Special Operations Task Group, Rotation 20, withdrew from Afghanistan at the end of 2013. So what we have now is a 4-year plan moving forward that is going to address the cultural issues that are identified in a report that is last relevant as at our deployment at the end of 2013. So it has been 8 years since we withdrew, and now all of a sudden we're going to do workplace reforms to address culture back then. I was a part of the Special Operations back then. There were cultural issues. I left the Special Operations in 2019. There were huge reforms undertaken between now and then and now. And furthermore, there has been such a huge staff turnover that less than 40% of the current personnel within SASR, Special Air Service Regiment in Perth, have even been to Afghanistan. And almost less than half of the people in the current commando capability have also been to Afghanistan. So not only are we missing the mark by 8 years, we're then exposing those who weren't even a part of that to reforms that are late, are lame, and are seen here only to be simply management on a paper to justify actions that should just actually have been an apology and accountability cast to those who stood up and grandstanded.
It seems to be a rewriting of history, and there's a lot of, pardon the French, arse covering going on. We've got the Chief of the Defence Force, Angus Campbell, and Defence Secretary Greg Moriarty saying, quote, they accepted responsibility for the failings in systems, culture and accountability exposed by the Brereton report and would work to restore the ADF's reputation by undertaking deep and enduring reform. Well, they're in charge. Why are they not named, shamed and booted out if they were the people in charge of the leadership?
Absolutely, Steve. In 2011, I took Prime Minister Gillard over on her first trip to Afghanistan, and the commander of the task forces for all Australians in the Middle East was then the two-star General Campbell, who was awarded a Distinguished Service Cross for his command and leadership, quote in the citation, in action. For starters, the honours and awards system for the Australian Defence Force needs an overhaul, but accountability starts at the top. And before you want to sit here and grandstand and preach in a document that you slide under the door while the Olympics is on, as opposed to the national press conferences you had when you thought you were out there establishing your authoritative position, it just doesn't fly. And my simple hope is, and we expect that the Chief of Defence Force will be put out to pasture for the next couple of months, and that the new Chief of Defence Force comes in and rips this well-articulated document up and puts it in the fire where it belongs.
Were any of the generals based in the UAE stripped of their meritorious awards?
No, and look, there were some who performed brilliantly, but you know what, Steve? You know, this, again, the whole Australian honours and awards system needs an overhaul. For it to be put down to, the actions of tactical commanders on the ground, noting, corporals and sergeants in this, the whole mark is being missed from, even in here it talks about the cultural shift that occurred over our 20 years there and how that went awry. What about the strategic shift and lack of strategic cohesion or even planning over the 20 years we were there, let alone our withdrawal that we're seeing now? You want to start at the bottom, trying to rearrange and shuffle the decks to cast accountability and blame to those who were there literally facing life and death decisions in action, while those at the top, sit there and cast assertions from high above. This is not what the Defence Force is built upon. Trust, leadership, the true nature of special operations comes down to specially selected and specially trained and specially equipped individuals, but the appetite and the support and knowledge that their government and their hierarchy has our backs when we are sent to do missions that don't have precedence, missions that you're simply told to go and solve this problem. And now, as we've been exposed by the Brereton report, all of a sudden we want to apply templates to them, and what's worse, we want to apply 36-page project management, leadership management documents 8 years after the date. That's going to expose defence to the next 4 years' worth of bureaucracy. It's baffling.
Really well explained, and you just wonder how we're going to recruit people into the Australian Defence Forces if they're going to have to put up with this sort of stuff. Well,
it's actually... I've been with you, Steve. Actually, at the moment, defence recruiting is at an all-time high, and unfortunately, that comes down to nothing more than people looking for a stable job. Some recent figures were being released, but look, I'm with you. My key issue is, Steve, that the culture, as we know, every business is built on people, and we talked about beforehand this warrior culture. I saw the warrior culture in Afghanistan. Push my guys to never fear for themselves and to achieve things that would be seen as superhuman and would be, some courage and some moral courage that we need here and now today in this country. And my real fear is that we are over-managing, adding red tape upon red tape, making people doubt and cast uncertainty through to what is ultimately actions that need to be made instinctively, and a purpose and emotion that has the potential to propel our nation, but at the moment is sort of pulling it apart. So my real worry is, as per this entire pandemic, that while we are treating the physical ailments of this infection, of this disease, the true cost is what we're actually doing to our society and doing to our culture, and it has to start from the top. And if there's one vaccine we need, it's an injection of leadership into the arms of those in our Defence Force and the senior high ranks and those in our government to help sort of unite the Australian people at the moment, just like what the Olympics is doing, and thank God that's on. But again, I'm really disgusted that this has been slid under the door while we've been sitting here watching the COVID pandemic and the Olympics on TV, as opposed to the airtime and grandstanding that was given when we sent shockwaves through the current defence community, veterans' families, and again, those families of those who watched the Chief of Defence Force say he was going to take away the honours and awards from their dead loved ones. It's really interesting to see where the priorities are right now.
Really well said, my friend. Good to talk to you again. Good luck.
You too. Thank you, Steve.
Heston Russell, former Special Forces